What's up, YouTube? Today I'm going to be reading some absurd stories I found the other day while on Reddit. I think today I'm just going to be making some farms in my Minecraft world. I just started, so don't judge too much. Happy New Year to you guys too. Hope you guys had a safe and fun holiday. Anyway, so let's get into it. Our first story tonight is called "The People of My Town Believe a Nuclear Apocalypse Happened Decades Ago. The truth is almost as terrible." Have you ever heard of the Japanese soldiers who didn't surrender along with the rest of their country in 1945 and spent decades hidden away in the belief that World War II raged on? The town I lived in for the early parts of my life gave me a similar experience. As kids in our small town, we all grew up with the same story. It was late October 1962, and the Cuban Missile Crisis threatened to engulf our planet in a fiery apocalypse. On the evening of October 27th, the townsfolk tucked themselves into bed for an inevitably restless night of sleep, whilst radio and television chatter in the background provided increasingly worried-sounding commentary of the situation at hand. At some point, the signals grew garbled before eventually turning into static, and the constant noise of live updates was suddenly sorely missed. Before dawn came, unfamiliar men in army fatigues went door to door and led the townspeople into the large shelter built beneath their feet in anticipation of the exact scenario they had been alerted to. Supposedly, some people refused with the explanation that there had been no official communication of an attack or a state of war, and that they would comply if they were allowed to find out for themselves through their long-defunct radio and television sets. Childhood rumor had it that none of these people were seen again. I was born a decade after that night. My first memory is playing catch with myself against a decaying concrete wall in the shelter. It was a pretty big place, bigger than you would expect for a town of our size, and life down there did its best to mimic the lives we had all had stolen from us. Those efforts were admirable, but ultimately fruitless. There was a dingy little school for the kids, a community kitchen with massive stockpiles of awful canned food and large rooms filled with rows upon rows of rusting metal bunk beds. Still, though, life in the shelter was awful. I would not wish being trapped underground with hundreds of people for decades on anybody. And the drab existence took its toll on the older townspeople who had once known a life far better than that one. There was a room that became notorious for the sheer amount of people who took their own lives there. They had to get creative with such limited resources, and sometimes it would take days or weeks for somebody to die after slitting their wrists with a dull and rusty knife. I would know, because my father died in that godforsaken room. They found his lifeless body dangling from the ceiling, and little 10-year-old me was left in a state of agony. I didn't talk for months after it happened, and sometimes I still wish it had been me instead of him. Then, at least, I wouldn't be burdened with the knowledge I am today. I remember being taught about the aftermath of the night that started all of this in school. We were told that most of our nation and the world had been ravaged by clouds of smoke and pillars of fire. That life on the ground above us was practically impossible. That we had to stay there forever, lest we faced the horrible deaths we had been saved from. There were a lot of rules to ensure we stuck to those ideals, but we were far too terrified to be skeptical of anything we were taught, and so those rules went untested. It took me until I was 19 to question the teachings we were expected to take as absolute truths. You see, whilst I was mostly a good citizen and complied with the rules of the shelter, I did have a sneaky little habit. I don't know why. Perhaps I had grown bored or just wanted to disobey the seemingly arbitrary rules for once, but I had a borderline obsession with exploring the nooks and crannies of the shelter. Finding untouched corners and hints of a life that supposedly didn't exist anymore gave me a thrill I didn't know was possible in that place. Those hints were usually boring by any outside measure, but one day I found something that left me both in awe and bewildered terror. A window. I didn't know what it was at first, because when I came across it, all I could see was a buildup of dust and cobwebs in the shape of a square. But I quickly got to work peeling away the layers that had built up over what was presumably a great many years to reveal something out of my wildest dream. An impossibly green landscape stood before my eyes. The sky was a deep blue with an occasional cloud floating by, and the houses abandoned decades before lay there in an unmaintained condition that gave them a unique character. I must have stood there for hours, taking it all in, wondering why the world I was taught about wasn't what I was staring at, wondering why we had been lied to. I made my way back to my bunk bed at some point and settled in for a night of restless sleep, of my few unconscious moments being pierced by the supposedly impossible landscape I had seen. It took me weeks to bottle up the courage to go back because I was terrified that my eyes had somehow deceived me, that I was losing my mind, and that I would end up in that room with the same fate my father faced. I couldn't tell anyone, and I didn't tell anyone. They would think I was losing my mind too, and understandably so. Eventually, though, I did go back, armed with a little piece of my bed that I had managed to break off. Do you know what it's like to have a burning desire to step out into a world that you had always been taught would kill you as soon as it got the chance? Because I do. The perfect palette of colors before me was too strong to resist. I needed to go out there, to run my fingers along the green grass, and to breathe in the air that had been meant for me. So I did. The window was large enough that after the glass was broken into minuscule pieces, it was easy for me to climb out. I took my first step that wasn't in that shelter and inhaled for as long as I could whilst my lungs filled with cool, wonderful air. I turned my head back toward the window only to find it was gone. Bare concrete lay in front of me, and my way out was no longer my way back in. Despite my confusion, I figured it was some long-forgotten security redundancy. I quickly forgot about that, though, as I refocused on the reality of life outside of that place. It was real. It was all real. I wasn't losing my mind. Everything I had seen through the window was exactly the same once I had rid myself of its constraints. Except one thing, it was out of view from the window, so I hadn't seen it before I climbed out. It pierced the otherwise impossibly pristine landscape around me. An army van. All four doors lay open, and there was a singular person in the front seat. His head had a bullet hole cleanly through it, and any blood from the incident had long dried up. As I walked closer to the van, I noticed a piece of paper beneath the deceased soldier's dangling foot. To whoever is lucky enough to read this, I am sorry for what we did to your people, to your families. During the Cold War, the unit I worked for was ordered to implement a psychological experiment. It went too far. We were supposed to keep you in the shelter for a year to test our readiness for what seemed like an inevitable future. To find out whether a shelter of that scale and nature could be our saving grace, our hope for rebuilding civilization in the event of the bombs finally falling. It was unethical at best, but I rationalized it with the false comfort of doing a service to our nation. I told myself that perhaps our research would one day keep us all alive, even if it meant mental torment for the people of your town. Well, a year came and left quite a while ago. Slowly, governmental and military interest in this little experiment dried up. On the night that this all began, you were led to believe that the bombs were fast approaching our nation. The people who refused to believe our word, legitimized only by army fatigues and commanding voices, were the smart ones. That's why it hurt so much when we were ordered to line them up against a wall and shoot them. They deserved so much better. The truth is that Cold War tensions began to ease following the emotional high point of the missile crisis, and over the years, the need for shelters subsided. With it, as I mentioned before, so did interest in our experiment. Our men filtered out over the course of months and years until I was the only one left. Perhaps the guilt I felt, the guilt that gnawed at me during every waking moment, kept me here. I had no purpose, no resources, and no way to get to the people we had condemned to a miserable life years before. Still, though, the empty remnants of the town this once was kept a tight grip on me, and I have never been able to leave. I will never leave. This is where I deserve to die, where I deserve to pay for the sins I committed upon the people who were once here. I hope and pray this letter someday finds a citizen of this condemned town, and I hope my confession can bring you some peace. I do not expect you to forgive me, nor do I deserve it, but please know that every moment I remain alive will be spent in an impossibly deep regret. I have one final wish. Please bury my body and this letter as deep as you can dig in the soil of this town. I deserve to be forever condemned to an existence underneath the ground of where this all began, an existence you have wrongly been forced to partake in. I hope my pain is far worse than we made yours. Goodbye. I must have sobbed for hours on end after reading the letter, and the days and weeks after that were a haze. Much of what I remember is made up of trying to get back into the shelter in a desperate bid to give my fellow townspeople the freedom of the life we were supposed to have. At every turn and entrance, I was met with meters of concrete, and I never succeeded in getting back into the shelter. I don't remember how long I tried, but eventually I gave up and decided to grant the deceased soldier his final wish. I dug for days and buried him outside the area where the window that started this all used to be. I know he said he doesn't deserve forgiveness, but he had the dignity to understand the awful nature of what he did, and he stayed with us until his end. He was a far better man than those who left us behind, forgotten about and condemned. I hope his regrets are washed away in the soil of our town. As for me, I left the town a long time ago. I lost my way out as I was leaving, and I was never told the original name of the town in the shelter, so unfortunately the memories are all the proof of my experience I have. The outside world took a lot of getting used to, but in the years since my escape, I have grown to be okay with my new life. Still, though, I will never forget what I left behind. Even if it was decades ago, my entire life was in that shelter, everybody I knew, and all that I loved. I wake up every morning having been tormented by nightmares of still being stuck in that deep, dark, underground prison, and yet I often find myself wishing for the comfort of those I lost upon my escape. I hope they found their peace with my sudden disappearance, but something in me knows they haven't. My pain and terror out here is almost as great as it was in there. Maybe ignorance is actually bliss, like they say. Perhaps, someday the townsfolk I once knew will be greeted with the same view of blue skies and green meadows I was. In the meantime, I desperately hope that they found a better existence in the shelter than the one I once knew. Our next story tonight is called I Live Alone. So, who keeps writing messages on my mirror? I turned 18 in 2008, and on the day of my birthday, for reasons I won't bore you with, I packed up my things and moved out. For 4 years, I lived in my car, working as a barista from 6 to 2, and as a line cook from 4 to 10. My plan was to work until I had enough money for my own place, and then to either go to college or get a more stable job. Looking back on it now, I don't know how I did it, but by 22, I'd saved up a decent sum of money and began my hunt for a semi-permanent place of residence. I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and though housing prices weren't as bad as they are now, it was still a pricey county. After months of asking around, I was connected with Anders, an elderly man who was leasing a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house in North Hollywood for far below market rate. The catch, though, because there's always a catch when it comes to affordable housing, was that the house had been terribly maintained. It had been unoccupied for a year and would need some serious TLC before most people could comfortably reside in it. I, however, had been living out of a car for 4 years. As long as the place had running water, it would be an upgrade for me. I moved into the house in fall 2012. Anders gave me a tour before I got settled. He was a short, joyful old man, well-meaning, but how do I put this? Maybe not the most focused as a result of his age. At one point during the tour, he showed me the bathroom, then the master bedroom, then the bathroom again, then the master bedroom again. He was about to walk into the bathroom for a third time before I gently guided him down the hall. The house itself was livable, but weathered. Dim lighting from outdated fixtures cast long shadows over peeling wallpaper. The ceiling in many of the rooms was discolored from past leaks. The faucet in the kitchen sink was broken. The bathtub was badly chipped, and a few of the cabinet handles fell off in my hand. It was a rundown place located in a bars-on-the-window kind of neighborhood. But still, it was my place. I was smiling ear to ear when Anders gave me the keys. It's a good house with good bones. You take care of it now, he instructed, which I found ironic. Before he left, he paused in the front doorway, drawing a hand to his chin as he looked behind me into the house. I tried to follow his gaze, but couldn't figure out what he was looking at. Everything all right? Yes. Just that something looks different about that bathroom, though I can't put my finger on what. Ah, well, it's a good house with good bones. You take care of it now. And with that, he gave me a nod and left me to my unpacking. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed living in a house. I didn't care how run down the place was. Just having an accessible bathroom and a full-size mattress to sleep on made me feel like a king. After I'd spent a few days cleaning the place up, I invited my sister and her fiancé over for dinner. I'm sure it sounds stupid, but my newly acquired ability to host company made me proud. In no time at all, I'd comfortably settled into my new home. That evening, after saying goodbye to my guests, I took a shower. The bathroom lacked a traditional above-the-sink mirror. Instead, it had a wide, full-length mirror mounted on the wall to the left of the vanity. When I exited the shower and stepped up to the glass, raising a hand to wipe away the fog, I noticed something odd. In the condensation, right at my eye level, was the word, "Hi." I didn't know what to make of it. Somehow, the letters seemed intentional. It was hard to pass off as simply the way that the steam had settled. My sister had been in the bathroom just before she left. Maybe she had written the word on the mirror with her fingertip, and the steam had only made the letters visible after my shower. I almost texted her about it, but the message seemed ridiculous when I typed it out. Paranoid, even. I wiped the mirror down and turned in for the night, and soon I forgot about it entirely. The following week, I received a promotion at one of my jobs, and while I was grateful for the additional income, my new position meant longer days. Additionally, I realized that a few of the house repairs were beyond my ability, and so I started outsourcing some work to contractors. It was annoying to only have the house to myself at night, but I didn't have another option with my busy schedule. Things were generally progressing smoothly, though every once in a while in the middle of the night, I would be awoken by a sound that I couldn't quite place. When I next noticed writing on my mirror, I had been living at the house for a month. The second sighting occurred in much the same way as the first. I came back home after work and took a shower. When I pushed back the shower curtain, I looked at the glass and saw, written in the condensation, the words, "Staying long." Now, I could pass two letters off as a coincidence, but two words, an entire question? That was no coincidence. Someone had been in my bathroom, and recently, I had contractors in and out of my house all the time, so one of them could have written the message, but why? I got dressed and put a hand on the bathroom doorknob, about to go back into my bedroom, when it occurred to me that whoever had written the message might still be around. I slowly cracked open the door, peering down the dark hallway in one direction, then the other. I listened very carefully, but heard nothing. I walked around my house, which didn't take long given its size, and looked for anything out of place. All of my doors were locked, all of my windows were shut, and none of my personal items had been disturbed. If someone had broken into my house, they were long gone by the time I looked around. That second message put me on edge for days. I triple-checked that my windows and doors were locked each night. I looked in every potential hiding spot, of which there were few in my little house, after I came home from work and before I went to sleep. And yet, though I was certain that my house was secure, I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. A month passed without incident. I had almost started to feel at home in my new lodgings again, until one Friday morning, I awoke just past 3 a.m. I couldn't immediately tell what had woken me. Often, the house settled at night, creaking and groaning in ways that made it sound alive. But in that moment, the house was silent. It was only after I turned my head to the side did I realize that my bedroom door, which I was certain I had shut, was wide open. I stared down the hallway, feeling as though I were gazing into a black hole. The darkness was abyssal. I kept waiting for my eyes to adjust, waiting for them to pick out the familiar shapes of my home, but they never did. I couldn't see a thing, so why did I feel like something could see me? like there was something in the house with me, just feet beyond the threshold to my bedroom, watching, waiting. Somehow I found the courage to rise from my bed and walk toward the door. When I made it to the handle, I grabbed it and slammed the door shut. I didn't investigate further, didn't so much as stick my head out into the hall for a closer look. My bedroom door didn't have a lock. None of the doors except the bathroom did. So I dragged my bookcase in front of the door. It was a small bookcase, and an intruder could probably ram the door open anyway if they wanted to, but not before the sound alerted me. When morning came and I had to leave the house for work, I genuinely considered exiting my house through the window. I was almost late by the time I worked up the nerve myself to look around my house before I left. As always, I found nothing amiss. After work, when I reluctantly returned home for the night, I ate a quick dinner and hopped in the shower. I remember standing in the tub for a long time, mulling over my predicament. I'd heard horror stories about people secretly living in other people's homes. Maybe I had become a victim of a frog without even knowing. But if that was the case, then where the hell were they? There was nowhere to hide in that tiny house. I'd torn the place apart multiple times by then, checking every cabinet and closet. The inside of the house couldn't be accessed from the crawl space, and the air vents were too small for a person to fit in. Suddenly, I heard a click, so tiny that I'd almost missed it entirely. I tore back the shower curtain, gripping the shampoo bottle like I was about to bludgeon an intruder to death with it. As I'd come to expect, there was no one in the room, but there was a new message on the mirror. This one was bold, the easiest to read of any of the messages I'd received so far. It was 3 words long. I see you. Some awful amalgam of fear, confusion, and anger made my stomach churn. Ultimately, the latter emotion rose above the rest. I hastily dried off and threw on some clothes, then grabbed my phone from where I'd left it on the bathroom counter. I punched in Anders' number and glared at that damn mirror as I listened to the phone ring again and again. I'd started to think it was too late for him to be awake when he suddenly picked up. He started to ask me how I was faring in my new lodgings before I cut him off. I need you to tell me if there's some way that a person could be getting into the house, I said. Every night, I check every window and door. I check every cupboard, closet, and cabinet. And still things are amiss. You need to let me know if there's some entry point that I'm not aware of. Anders didn't seem to entirely understand what I was asking. What's getting in? You let me know if you're having rat troubles. My last tenant, before you had rat trouble sometimes. Yeah, sure, I've got rats. Besides the doors and the windows, how could they be getting in? Well, there's the vents, of course, and there was a chimney once, though we had it sealed up a good long while ago. And there's also the crawl space, of course, though I'm sure you've already poked around down there. Though I knew the home had a crawl space, I'd never had much reason to investigate it. I was never able to find the entrance, even after ripping up all the carpeting in the house. Likely hardwood had been installed over the access door, making it an unlikely point of entry for an intruder. How do I get down to the crawl space? Yes, you should give the crawl space a gander. I barely stopped myself from smashing the phone into the counter. I plan to. Where can I find the entrance? That'll be on the floor of the bathroom closet. I looked around the room. Surely I'd misheard him. Either that or he was confused again. What? I know, it's an odd place for it, but it's only there because that room didn't always used to be a bathroom. The bathroom doesn't have a closet. Sure it does. Just to the left of the vanity. I looked at the mirror. At that long, oversized mirror. I'd always found it odd for a bathroom of that size to have a built-in floor-to-ceiling mirror. What was it that Anders had said when he'd first visited? That something had looked different about the bathroom? Setting my phone down next to the sink, I stepped up close to the glass. I spent a few moments feeling around the frame, looking for a latch. Then I grabbed a portion of the right side of the frame in 2 hands. After one hard yank, the mirror swung open like a door, revealing a large walk-in closet. Anders was saying something on the other end of the line, but I was too stunned to answer. There was a square-shaped hole at the back of the closet, which I assumed led down to the crawl space beneath the house. The closet floor was littered with all kinds of trash, filthy sheets, fast food containers, beer cans, and I realized some of my own items. Little things I thought I'd misplaced: a sock, a toothbrush, a comb, and a small framed photograph of me, my sister, and our old family dog. I crouched down to pick up the photo perched in the doorway as I studied my younger, smiling self. I heard Anders saying my name over the phone, except the voice didn't sound much like Anders at all. It was too deep, too clear, too close. When I looked up, a man was peeking out at me from the hole in the floor. He smiled at me, his eyes wide and pupils blown. His smile so wide, it looked painful, and his hair long and matted. He was only visible from the neck up, and the harsh lighting made it look like a disembodied head was grinning at me from the back of the closet. Horrified, I rose to my feet and ran. I didn't stop running until I made it to my car, which I promptly drove to my sister's house. The next day, I drove to the police station to file a report. An officer met me at the house to check the scene, and I showed him the hidden closet, which indeed had an entrance to the crawl space. My best guess was that the intruder was entering my crawl space from the small door on the side of my house. He'd likely been squatting in the house during the year in which it sat unoccupied, and when he saw it was being prepared for sale, he had disguised the closet door so as to keep a little room for himself. Why he decided to stay or why he was leaving me messages, I can't say. From his actions and from what little I saw of him, I think it's safe to assume that he wasn't of sound mind. Unfortunately, the man was never found. For all I know, he's still in that same neighborhood. Hell, he might even be in the same house. I moved across the county afterwards and have lived in studio apartments ever since. The thought of living in a big house with all those rooms and corners and places to hide gives me the creeps. It's not just houses that the incident soured for me, but mirrors as well. These days when I visit a friend or stay at a hotel, I always have to carefully inspect the bathroom mirrors, shining a light directly into their faces and tapping a finger against the glass. Because the worst detail of the whole ordeal was that when revisiting the bathroom with the police officer, I stepped into the old closet, closed the door, and looked into the mirror. Instead of the mirror backing, I saw the officer's face on the other side of the glass.